Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. As we all know that having said is pretty easy, but when it comes to the actual reality, things are very different. Recent bombings that killed many people in Afghanistan is one example of the current situation out there. Violence is erupting again. And then again, one very important factor is that who is going to fill in the vacuum once the US forces or the NATO forces, they leave. So that is a million-dollar question. So today, quickly, I'll tell you what is the agenda of our program, the major areas of focus. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that the Speaker of Afghanistan's Walisi Jargah, Mir Rehmani, met Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Foreign Minister welcomed the visiting dignitary to Pakistan for the second General Conference of the Parliamentary Assembly of Economic Cooperation Organization, starting from May 31st to June 3rd, 2021. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs further says that the Foreign Minister underlined the imperative of the reduction of violence leading to ceasefire and that the Afghan parties would seize its historic opportunity and work out an inclusive, broad-based and comprehensive political settlement. It further says that the Foreign Minister underlined the need to be vigilant about the role of spoilers, both within and outside Afghanistan. He stressed the importance of maintaining a constructive and conducive environment for advancing shared goals. So, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says that we would have implemented risks for our alliance with more fighting, potentially more fighting, more and more casualties, and even the need to maybe increase the number of troops. So, therefore, we made the decision to end our mission within weeks. He further stated that we are stepping up our support to Afghanistan in other ways. We will maintain our civilian presence in Afghanistan to provide advice and capacity building to the Afghan security institutions and provide out of country training for the Afghan security forces. And furthermore, the US military is nearly at the halfway point in pulling its forces from Afghanistan, only a month into the effort. US Central Command estimates that it has completed between 30 to 44% of the entire retrograde process. So we all know that once the American forces will leave, and according to certain forces, almost 30 to 40% of the troops they have already left. The remaining are in the process, and the deadline given is perhaps that is the 9/11. That also is a very, very historical date, 20 years since the 9/11 incident happened in New York. And most likely they will be vacating most of their troops by the end of July. This is the general perception. What is going to happen after that? That is the real story. To talk about it, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us Dr. Talat Shabir Saab, Senior Analyst in our studio. So thank you very much for your time. And we have with us Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab. Needs no introduction again. He's a Senior Diplomat, Foreign Ambassador. Naqvi Saab, what a pleasure to have you on the show, sir. Thank you so much for your presence as well. And we'll also be talking to Kamran Yusuf, a fellow journalist and also a senior analyst. But let me put the first question to you, sir. The vacuum, you know, everybody's talking about the vacuum. Obviously, once the American and the NATO troops, they will leave. But now, having said that, Mr. Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, he says that we'll keep a certain number of civilians to facilitate the people of the Afghan forces present inside Afghanistan, and perhaps we'll also take them abroad for training purposes. Now, let's talk about that.
In fact, that the most important issue in the region is, I think, at the moment is Afghan issue, which needs resolution. And when I talk about this issue, you know, we must know that there's something desirable in Afghanistan. For instance, the American forces wish to leave Afghanistan. There has to be peace and prosperity. There has to be political settlement. There has to be consensus solution for consensus agreement between all factions of Afghanistan for a kind of political settlement that you mentioned. But at this moment, the situation is very grim because I don't see any consensus formula coming up very soon. But given the dates, given the time frame that American forces are giving, and that is July, August of this year, I think it's too close by. And
but this is the beginning of June.
Yes, this is the beginning of June. It's very close by. Time is reaching anytime soon. So I think it is going to be difficult situation for not only for the region, but for the global, because of NATO's involvement in Afghanistan and America's involvement in Afghanistan. It's a global issue also. So there has to be a consensus formula, there has to be inclusive arrangement, there has to be broad-based solution to this issue, and of course this is the top agenda on the wish list of all the regional as well as global powers. But in my opinion, in my assessment, I think it doesn't seem to be possible within 2-3 months, that the time frame that is being given. The major problem is that when the military armed forces leave Afghanistan, American forces and NATO leave Afghanistan, are the Afghans or the Afghan forces are capable of handling security issues?
Answer is no, sir.
Yes, that's a big no. And how will then Afghan government, and first of all, before that, the security forces of Afghanistan will have to be guided, driven, directed by some consensus government. So it is very complex situation at the moment. I think this complex situation will continue, and in my view, this will be very hurried. This is very hurried withdrawal of forces. Of course, in my assessment, Pakistan would wish to have peace in Afghanistan, and stability, long-term.
Do you see peace in Afghanistan, let's say, in another 6 to 8 months, once the American forces leave? Because this is the biggest concern of the Pakistanis, that what is going to happen. When you talk about the presence of the Taliban, sir, I'm not sure what would be the actual result if proper, free, fair and transparent elections are held. But having said that, when you talk about the street power, sir, we all know who has the street power, who can fill in the vacuum. But it is also believed that the Americans are leaving Afghanistan in a hurry, in a haste.
Yes.
And that is going to be a problem and a half, because they don't mind what's going to happen once they leave. That is not their headache anymore. But sir, whether they'll keep some civilian presence, if so, in what kind of a form, contractors or otherwise, will that be acceptable to the Taliban? If it is not acceptable, what would be the result? And it is going to be a very complicated situation, and it perhaps seems that Afghanistan now is heading, in these given circumstances, Afghanistan is heading towards an absolute chaos.
Just a fact. One fact is that at the moment 50% area of Afghanistan is controlled by government, 30% is area controlled by Taliban, and 20% area is contested. That means virtually the government of Afghanistan does not have control over 50% of the area. Now this is the fact, and it is agreed by most analysts on Afghanistan. In the presence of NATO forces, in the presence of American forces, so if the situation there is that there is a contested area, there is a Taliban controlled area, in the presence of these forces, so the situation in their absence, without reaching a consensus formula between the factions, I think will complex the situation. I don't think so that in any time soon the warring factions in Afghanistan will reach a consensus formula whereby they can have a stable government, they have a stable political settlement in Afghanistan, and with which they can control, because unless and until you reach a consensus formula between factions, and when I say factions, we understand there are factions who are poles apart ideologically and in their political approach, in their kind of structure, they are opposed to each other.
The thinking is very different.
Yes.
That is the interesting
That's a big
part.
problem. That's a big problem.
So if you allow me, sir, let me also bring in former Ambassador Naqvi Saab in the conversation. Naqvi Saab, first of all, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam, Faisal.
So good to have you in the show, sir. Now, sir, go ahead, please.
No, fine. You go ahead.
Okay. Now, sir, since we are talking about this current scenario that is in Afghanistan, I mean, it seems that the American forces, they're leaving in a haste, in a hurry. Earlier, we were saying that they're not leaving. Now, once they're leaving, we shouldn't have expected too much from them, either from NATO or otherwise. Now, the situation is getting so fluid in Afghanistan, it seems as if Afghanistan is heading towards a civil war-like situation. If certain important measures are not taken, what do you think, sir? What's going to happen in, let's say, 3 to 4 months from now in Afghanistan? What sort of a setup do you see there? Do you see a re-election, or do you see some kind of a settlement between various factions, or do you see perhaps an infight going on to make sure that whosoever gets hold of Kabul?
Yeah, Faisal, first an observation about what has happened. What has happened is that the American experiment has failed. The Americans created this entire structure of government under the Bonn Conference of 2002. And in that Bonn Conference, Pakistan and Taliban, the two principal parties these days in various contexts, were not included. So the Americans tried everything. They set up a government, they created a constitution, they held elections and all that. It was all failed. Now, the difference between Afghanistan and Vietnam is that in Vietnam they left from the rooftop in a helicopter. Here they will leave in a relatively more orderly fashion. But the difference is that in Vietnam the country was united. In Afghanistan the country is disunited and in complete disarray. Now, that's one thing. The other is that Pakistan remains a principal stakeholder in the sense that Pakistan is not directly involved in Afghanistan, but Pakistan is a neighbor. Pakistan has a deep interest. There are a large population of Afghanistan has ethnic links with the population in Pakistan. So Pakistan has to try and play a constructive role. Now, Pakistan has prepared the ground, I think, because first it says that Afghan peace should be Afghan-led and Afghan-owned. Secondly, Pakistan has been very instrumental in bringing the American and the Taliban on the table. Actually, Pakistan's efforts began way back in Murray, when that was the scuttle a few years ago. So we have always been trying to do some kind of peacemaking in Afghanistan. Now, the future, you have asked the question, what will happen? Excuse me. The future is very uncertain because despite all the efforts that Pakistan might make, there is such total disarray amongst the Afghan parties that any modicum of agreement is not on the horizon. Here, I think I'll bring in one more point about China and Russia. I think these two major regional powers will also try to make efforts to prevent a total collapse of government, total civil war in Afghanistan. But how far that will go, we don't know. Iran also has some role to play. So the whole issue is wide open again, and the picture is very murky. In the next 6 months, I think if the Kabul government can hold its own, which is very, very doubtful, then in that case, things might try to take some shape. Otherwise, there will be a collapse.
Now, Ambassador Saab, do you think, it is very difficult for the current government to remain in power? But sir, what would be the solution? Will be, for example, do you see elections in the coming months or something of that sort, an interim government setup which doesn't actually exist in their constitution? How the Afghan constitution is like. There is no concept of the interim government out there. Or perhaps a hostile takeover by whosoever is in power, sir, like Taliban for that matter.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I think elections would be possible only if there is some order in the country, if the government is functioning, because elections have to be organized by the government in power. Secondly, so that I don't see possible as things stand. Secondly, transitional government or an interim government, that is not provided for in their constitution. And the present President Ashraf Ghani is totally opposed to any transitional arrangement. So that also is very unlikely. And then there will be a free-for-all, and in that case, the Taliban have an upper edge. But one factor that has come to the fore is that the Afghan society has changed since the 90s. So the Taliban will not, the Afghan Taliban will not find it that easy to establish control over the country as, or even Kabul, as they did in the earlier episode. So it is, I think, a very, very, as I said, a very, very uncertain situation, and international forces is another factor. I don't think that the Western countries will try to venture into this. I said Russia and China might take an interest, but unless there is a country that is ready to bring in peacekeeping force and keep peace between the different factions, it won't work. Just negotiations won't work.
All right. Now, Kamran Yusuf Saab, I hope I'm audible to you, sir. Kamran?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Now, Kamran, I'm sure you must have heard what Dr. Talat Saab said or Dr. Naqvi was talking about. Now, there is another huge threat, sir. We all know that the regrouping of the terrorist outfits in Afghanistan, that is a major threat. Again, the role of the non-state actors and obviously the foreign support and everything. Now, these cross-border attacks emanating from the Afghan side now, so that's a big threat to Pakistan, and this is not the first time that we have faced this kind of a situation. We have faced that earlier as well. But now in the future, sir, in the absence of the American and NATO troops, what do you think? Rather, what do you foresee happening in the future now?
I think as far as Pakistan is concerned, it is a clear and present danger. I think we are not saying this, and even more recently, the CENTCOM chief, General McKenzie, before the U.S. Armed Services Committee, said that if there is a civil war, if there is an unrest in Afghanistan, the country that is going to be most affected by that is going to be Pakistan. So this is also the assessment of the Americans, and that is why, of course, that we are focusing on fencing this long and rugged and porous border, and also introducing, border mechanisms. But we have seen that the anti-Pakistan groups operating from Afghanistan, TTP and its affiliates, are regrouping, and recently that they have claimed, certain attacks, particularly that what we have seen outside the five-star hotel in Quetta, which was previously uncharted territory for them. So there is a clear threat for Pakistan, and perhaps that is the reason that Pakistan is very keen to have some kind of political settlement in Afghanistan, because in the absence of that political settlement, Pakistan is going to suffer. And what is clear now, that without using any diplomatic words or language, it is clear that the U.S. is now running from Afghanistan. We have to be absolutely clear. We were seeking orderly and responsible withdrawal, but I don't think so that the Biden administration is really keen on that, because earlier they were saying that they will withdraw by 11 September, but now we are hearing reports that by July 4, they are going to complete this drawdown. And as far as the peace process is concerned, it hangs in balance. There is absolutely no progress. And probably the reason is that the shift in the American approach. If you talk to the American analysts, if you really look into the thinking of the Americans, they don't really perceive Afghanistan as their major, policy priority. They are focusing more on China. They are focusing more on building strategic relationship with India, Australia, Japan to counter China. So whatever is happening now, I'm afraid that Pakistan has to deal with whatever mess that the Americans are going to leave behind in Afghanistan, and that was our biggest fear, and it appears that it is now on our doors now.
Kamran, another very important factor, and that is about the role of Rashid Dostum as an Uzbek. He is a Walrod, and this man has a lot of strength, a lot of men with him. You talk about the role of the people from Panjshir, Ahmad Shah Massoud's brother or his son for that matter. The brother was in Pakistan. And again, we can't rule out the role of Abdullah in that capacity. the role of the former president, Hamid Karzai. Obviously, the role of the current president would be there, but as long as he is the president. And then the Taliban factor and the non-state actors. This is a perfect recipe for an absolute disaster, sir, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the entire blame has to go to the people of Afghanistan. When I say the people of Afghanistan, their political leadership, because ultimately they will have to come to a consensus. But unfortunately, the differences are so deep that it appears that this is not possible. The only positive thing that I see, you talked about different factions and groups. Dr. Abdullah, I think, is one political leader who I believe is looking at things more pragmatically. Previously he was critical of Pakistan, but I think after looking at Pakistan's role, constructive role, looking at the ground situation, he has changed his opinion a lot. But you cannot say the same about other leaders, whether it is Karzai, whether it is President Ashraf Ghani. They still appear to be towing the line of certain other countries, and that is the major problem. They are not doing disservice, I should say, to Pakistan. They are doing disservice to their own people, because for their own sake, they have to show flexibility. If they don't show flexibility, if they really, toe lines of other vested interests and other people, then you are absolutely right that Afghanistan is heading towards a doomsday scenario. And at the moment, it appears that things are not looking really pretty in Afghanistan. And this should be a cause of concern, not just for Pakistan, but also the other neighboring countries of Afghanistan.
Correct, sir. Now one important area, sir, that is about the fear of most of the Pakistanis, our agencies and people who are the top decision makers. They believe that if there is not a proper political settlement before the US withdrawal, things will not be that great. And if you make a commitment, you have to stick with it. Now, sir, in this particular situation, when the Americans are almost leaving, brother Kamran was just saying that July 4th, now July 4th again is a very significant date. So if they leave by that time, sir, you're talking about 4 weeks from now. 4 weeks from now. Today is the 2nd of June. Now, sir, within the next 4 weeks, a political settlement is possible under the given circumstances, or perhaps if there is no political settlement and the US withdrawal takes place. In both the scenarios, what do you see?
I think
how do you read the abstract?
Expecting something good about it is, I think, expecting a miracle happening in Afghanistan. There are few things that Kamran Saab and Naqvi Saab mentioned. One is the role of other countries. You see, when Americans leave Afghanistan in a mess, who is going to be partner in peace with them? You see, there's a complete mess in Afghanistan. There are factions, there are warring factions in Afghanistan. Why should China and Russia jump in? They won't jump in. Yes, if there was a orderly withdrawal, as we say, and there is peace and stability in Afghanistan, yes, you can ask international players, you can ask regional countries to cooperate in maybe rebuilding Afghanistan, etc. But in this case, when you completely leave Afghanistan in mess, I think no regional country would be jumping into it. One. Second, it's very important for Pakistan to know that there are Taliban factions, there are forces, and there are non-state actors.
Correct.
Now, in Pakistan, we have a danger of these non-state actors collaborating with the non-state actors in Balochistan as well as in FATA, former FATA, and trying to create. And of course, when the situation worsens, so we can also have many people migrating into our KP province.
As refugees, yes.
That will and in that garb, you might have certain miscreants and terrorists and non-state actors coming over to Pakistan.
Within Pakistan
and
during the time when these IDPs.
I think that is absolutely dangerous for Pakistan. And of course, I agree with Kamran Saab's analysis that the only country that will be affected adversely with this mess will be Pakistan.
Now, that is a serious, rather very serious fear or a concern. Your take on the same point, Ambassador Saab, what is the biggest fear Pakistan is actually looking at?
Well, as Dr. Talat said, I mean, Pakistan, and as Kamran said, Pakistan is the country that's likely to be most badly affected by this turn of events. Uh, I think Pakistan should not try to, play a role to change things and make it better or worse or whatever. Pakistan should just keep a neutral position and maintain the contacts with all the Afghan factions and not be seen in Afghanistan as totally linked to the Taliban. Now, that is one thing. And the other is the fencing, that is very important because I think that will be a deterrent to militants and all kinds of non-state actors to spill over into Pakistan. After that, uh, the whole thing will work out as may be ordained by the Almighty, and we all have to wait and see how things shape up. But we should keep all our options open and try and play a constructive role.
Kamran, your take, sir. Kamran Yusuf?
I don't think so that they are going to play any positive role. The only positive role that we can foresee is other regional countries. Pakistan, along with Russia, China, Iran, can come together and help and facilitate some kind of political settlement inside Afghanistan because stakes are high. Even for China, they know that if there is a trouble in Afghanistan, there can be a problem for CPAC, there can be a problem for their Belt and Road Initiative. And I see this is the only way forward. Otherwise, I think we should not have high hopes as far as the U.S. is concerned. I think that the U.S. is clearly, running away from Afghanistan. So the only thing is we have to build a regional consensus.
No, regional consensus for sure, sir. But who's going to pull in that kind of money which the Americans were? Do you think Russians or the Chinese? Chinese perhaps are, and maybe even the Russians can. But the kind of money they need to run their daily business, for example, the pays of their forces and so on and so forth. Who's going to be responsible for that?
I think this is the biggest leverage whatever country that now has. Even when people say that when U.S. will leave, all their troops, what kind of leverage they have? The only leverage that they have, that is the financial muscle. The only thing that they can tell the Taliban that, look, that if you cooperate with us, we will give you money, we will help you in reconstruction and rehabilitation. And I think the same is the case with China. China can also tell the Afghan Taliban, don't use force, don't take Kabul militarily over by force, because if you do that, then you can expect us to have kind of financial and other cooperation. I think this is what is Pakistan also doing, because Pakistan has also principally and publicly stated that we will not support a military takeover by any group, either the Taliban or any other group within Afghanistan. And I think this is loud and clear message, not just to other groups, but also to the Taliban. So Taliban will have also need to change their approach if they are to, if they think that their future role will be acceptable to the larger international community.
All right, but do you see elections at some stage?
I don't think so. Election, happening at this stage. The best possible solution, I think, the Taliban, the Americans, and even Pakistan and other countries, and even Russia are talking about the best case scenario. If there is a political consensus, let's hope, then there can be an interim government, inclusive government, inviting all the groups, and then they have to build a consensus that what kind of political setup, what kind of constitution that the people of Afghanistan want. And once there is a consensus, then you can move to the election phase. But at this stage, I don't think so that the elections are possible.
All right, thank you so much, Kamran Yusuf, for your comments. And was a pleasure having you, Ambassador Naqvi. Thank you so much for your participation as well. And Dr. Shabi, always a pleasure to have you on the show, sir. And that's all we have for this. I'll see you, inshallah, tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.